Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's uh, this expectation of clinical precision.
Right.
Like, it feels like engineering almost.
Yeah.
You break your arm and the x-ray shows that jagged white line and the doctor just points and says, well, there it is. That's the fracture.
Yeah, it's very comforting because it's binary. It's broken or not broken.
Exactly. It's visible, it's categorized, and you know exactly who or what is at fault.
We really crave that kind of definitive proof. Especially when trying to understand like a catastrophic failure, we want to point at the x-ray and see the exact moment the bone snapped.
But then you step into the world of history, specifically the deep, murky history of ruined civilizations. And suddenly that x-ray machine is just totally broken.
Oh yeah, entirely broken.
Because we thought we had a clean image of the apocalypse that wiped out the ancient Vaal civilization in the year 400 BIC. Like, if you asked any lore enthusiast who's been piecing together the fragments of this world, they would point at the jagged line on the x-ray and say, there, that's the fault of one man, Doryani.
Which was the accepted truth for years.
Right. The narrative was set in stone. He was this brilliant, arrogant, totally unhinged thaumaturge who flew too close to the sun. He tried to commune with a godlike entity known as the Beast and just doomed millions of people. Case closed.
It was a very clean narrative, the quintessential arrogant scientist pushing the boundaries of nature and paying the ultimate price.
Except the stack of sources we are opening up today for this deep dive, which is an incredibly detailed look into the emerging lore of Path of Exile 2, it takes that established X-ray and flips it completely upside down.
It really does. It shows us we've been looking at the wrong patient entirely.
Yeah. Doryani didn't cause the apocalypse.
Yeah.
Based on the newest evidence, Doryani might have been the only person on the entire continent frantically trying to stop it.
Which is just a massive historical recontextualization. I mean, we are looking at a journey involving ancient empires, unimaginable blood magic technology, multi-generational grudges, and literal time paradoxes today.
That's wild.
But fundamentally, it is a story about how history is misunderstood by the people who stumble upon its ruins thousands of years later.
So to really grasp the weight of this retcon, I think we need to anchor you, the listener, in the timeline of this universe. Because it gets complicated.
Very complicated, yeah.
The present day in this new era of exploration is the year 1619 IC. Now, IC stands for the imperial calendar, which marks the foundation of the Eternal Empire. About 300 years prior to our present day, in 1336 IC, that Eternal Empire fell to its own cataclysm.
Right, the one caused by Malachai.
Exactly. A scholar named Malachai communed with the Beast, and the resulting shockwave twisted the entire continent into a nightmare.
And the beast itself is crucial to define here, just so we're all on the same page. It isn't just a physical monster buried deep underground. It functions as the wellspring of all corruption and thaumaturgical magic in Wraeclast.
The source of the rot, basically.
Yeah, thaumaturgy in this context is the science of manipulating reality by channeling the beast's dark energy. So it is essentially weaponized corruption.
So the Eternals blew themselves up with this power. But 400 years before the Imperial era even began, so 400 BIC, the Vaal civilization suffered their own cataclysm. And we are talking about a civilization that makes the Eternal Empire look like absolute amateurs.
Oh, totally. The Eternals had a solid run of about 1,300 years. The Vaal, though written history, didn't even begin until 900 BIC, when the Vaal casually decided to teach their neighboring tribes, the Asmeri, how to read and write.
Like it was an afterthought. Oh, let's teach the neighbors the alphabet.
Exactly. There is an ancient entity in the lore known as the Hooded One, formerly the being named Sin, who actually visited the Vaal in their absolute prime, and he described them as the height of civilization.
Wow.
This was before the beast even existed in the dormant, mountain-sized form we are familiar with. Yet once the nightmare of the beast began to seep into the world, the Vaal didn't just stumble into corruption, they systematically industrialized it.
Yeah, the sources describe the ancient Asmeri looking at the Vaal and seeing people whose flesh was adorned with glittering crystals. These are virtue gems, and we need to explain the mechanics of these gems because they aren't just pretty rock.
No, not at all.
They are the crystallized blood of the beast. When a person embeds one into their flesh, it grants them reality-bending abilities. But the Vaal looked at the raw power of these gems and asked just a horrifying question. They asked, how can we supercharge the yield?
And their solution was just a masterclass in sociopathy. They discovered that the crystalline lattice of a virtue gem could act as a prison, so they began imbuing these gems with actual human souls.
which the ancient peoples called the tears of Magi.
The imagery there is visceral.
It's awful.
Yeah.
They're tears because the magic is fueled by the perpetual conscious agony of the human soul trapped inside the stone. Modern exiles just call them Vaal gems, completely oblivious to the suffering powering their fireballs.
Which is incredibly dark when you think about the player experience.
Right. I look at the comparison between the Eternal Empire and the Vaal, and I see a distinct difference in culpability.
Yeah.
Like the Eternal Empire, the guys who blew themselves up in 1336 IC, they're like a cover band. They found some amplifiers left on the stage, plugged them in, had no idea how the wiring worked, and accidentally blew up the venue.
That's a great way to put it.
But the Vaal were the original rock stars. They built the amplifiers from scratch, they wired the pyrotechnics, they knew exactly the thermal limits of the explosives, and they chose to play the show anyway until the roof literally caved in. So why do these massive, supposedly enlightened civilizations keep making the exact same apocalyptic mistakes when confronted with the beast?
Well, if we approach this from a systems thinking perspective, it isn't just a recurring accident, it's a feature of absolute power.
A feature, not a bug.
Exactly. The beast acts as a fundamental temptress for human ambition. It provides an immediate, highly effective shortcut to societal advancement. Need unlimited energy, use the beast.
Like, need to cure diseases,
Yeah.
tap into corruption.
Yep. But the toll is always moral degradation. It takes the inherent human desire for security or knowledge or immortality, and it twists the methodology required to achieve it. So it ensures that societal peak and self-destruction happen simultaneously.
Which perfectly frowns the leadership of the Vaal at the time of their cataclysm. So in 400 BIC, the Vaal were ruled by Queen Atziri. She operated out of Utzaal Vaal, which sits geographically where the modern ruined city of Sarn is located today. And Atziri was consumed by one specific human desire: eternal youth and beauty.
A vanity so profound it dictated national policy.
And her right-hand man, the chief thaumaturge, was Doryani. He operated out of a different city, a stronghold called Utzaal. Now, for years, the established lore insisted Doryani was the architect of the end.
Right, we had texts from ghost historians like Siosa talking about Doryani's cradle. This was a physical bed constructed inside the beast where virtue gems were brought for communion.
We even had quotes from Sin himself referring to a catastrophic wound in the beast wrought by that Vaalish overreacher Doryani.
But the new archaeological evidence from Utzaal forces us to completely discard that narrative. The texts reveal that Doryani was screaming for everyone to stop.
Like, just begging them.
Yeah, it was Queen Atziri who initiated the communion. She became convinced that fully merging her consciousness with this entity of pure corruption would grant her and her entire populace eternal life.
Which puts Doryani in a fascinating, impossible position. Like, let's put ourselves in his shoes for a moment. You are the most powerful scientist in existence. You understand the literal physics of corruption better than anyone alive.
We've run the numbers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You look at the data of what Atziri is proposing, you map the trajectory, and you know with absolute mathematical certainty that if your queen goes through with this communion, it will rip the fabric of reality apart. But you are trapped by the structure of an absolute monarchy. You cannot openly defy a god queen whose very whim dictates life and death.
Because if you speak out, you are executed and she destroys the world anyway.
Right. So what is the logical play? You have to build a contingency plan in absolute secrecy.
Which recontextualizes his entire historical persona. The evil scientist pushing the boundaries of morality was at least in part a calculated cover. It allowed him to secure the resources and the isolation he needed to build a desperate, sprawling, multi-millennia survival mechanism for the disaster he knew was imminent.
Okay, but I have to push back on that framing just a bit because I don't want us slipping into treating Doryani as some misunderstood tragic hero.
Fair enough.
Yes,
Yeah.
the geopolitical position he was in was impossible, but we cannot look away from his methods. We are talking about a man whose entire technological foundation relied on human sacrifice. If he knows the Titanic is going to sink and he decides to secretly build a lifeboat, well, that's rational.
Sure.
But Doryani builds his lifeboat out of the severed bones of the steerage passengers. He powers the engine by burning the crew alive. Sure, he's trying to save a remnant of his people from the iceberg, but his methods are completely unhinged.
That is a crucial distinction to make. Recognizing his ultimate goal was preservation does not absolve him of his atrocities. He remained a product of his society.
Yeah.
He fundamentally believed that corruption and the human suffering required to harness it were simply tools to be mastered. He didn't object to the immorality of Atziri's communion. He objected to the bad math.
He knew her specific equation would result in an explosion, not immortality.
Exactly.
So if you are building a massive secret lifeboat made of bones, where do you hide a shipyard that big? You hide it in Utzaal. And the sheer scale of the obsession surrounding this specific city is just staggering.
It really is.
If we jump back to the present day, 1619 icy explorers are dropped off at the edge of the sand-swept marsh. Beyond that toxic marsh lies Utzaal. It is famous in archaeological circles because it has been considered impenetrable for 2 millennia. Why? Because when the Cataclysm began, the Vaal nobles strategically flooded their own city.
And we get a chilling window into the psychology of that decision from the expedition logbooks left behind by ancient Kalguran explorers.
Let's talk about the Kalgurans because their role in this is wild. The ancient Kalgurans lived on a totally different landmass. In 400 BIC, they see the sky literally turn blood red over the continent of Wraeclast.
A completely terrifying cosmic event.
Right. And instead of running the other way, they sail over to see if they can loot whatever just exploded.
Typical Kalgurans.
Exactly. They arrive at the ruins of Utzaal, but they find the city completely submerged beneath the marsh waters. And the Kalguran scribe records a line that is just dripping with dark implications. He says the nobles of Utzaal had opened their own waterways and purposely drowned themselves, not as a mercy, but to spite would-be looters.
That sentence is the skeleton key to understanding the Vaal mindset. They're staring down the barrel of an apocalypse they caused. The sky is bleeding. Reality is unraveling. And their final dying act isn't repentance or evacuation. It is supreme possessive spite.
If I can't have it, no one can.
Precisely. They would rather drown in the dark with their gold than allow a foreigner to touch their grandeur. It is the purest distillation of institutional arrogance.
What blows my mind, though, is the multi-generational grudge the Kalgurans hold over this. During that initial failed looting attempt in 400 BIC, the Kalgurans lost a massive warding artifact called the Triskelion Flame.
Right down in the mud.
Yeah. Now, in 1619 IC, 2,000 years later, the modern Kalgurans from a settlement called Kingsmarch are secretly funding an expedition led by Orianthan treasure hunters, specifically Oswald and Elva, to finally crack the flooded city of Utzaal. Like, what could possibly justify funding a suicide mission into a toxic swamp for 2 millennia?
It speaks to a societal obsession, an inherited ambition. The modern Kalgura aren't just looking to recover a lost trinket. Utzaal represents a foundational failure in their own history.
Oh, I see.
It is a puzzle their ancestors couldn't solve. When an entire culture builds its identity on exploration and conquest, a submerged city that actively defied them becomes a generational psychological itch that must be scratched.
And the environment surrounding the city makes it perfectly clear why no one has survived the attempt in 2,000 years. The jungle has adapted to pure nightmare. The logbooks detail the Auroch tribe, referred to as the Painted Men.
They're terrifying.
They are cannibalistic. But the explorers note they possess terrifying canine mutations. Let's think about the biological mechanics of that. This isn't natural evolution. This is what happens when human DNA stews in an environment completely saturated with ancient radioactive corruption for 2 millennia.
Like a magical fallout zone.
Exactly. The magic literally overwrites their biology to make them apex predators in a ruined ecosystem.
And incredibly, the Auroch aren't even the apex. You have the Azak tribe locked in a perpetual bloody war with the Auroch that has lasted almost as long as the Vaal have been dead.
The Azak are led by a bog witch named Igduk, who allegedly steals children every blood moon. And the entire geography is littered with venom crypts dedicated to Yaumak, a 3-headed serpent god that feasts on Vaal's souls.
There is a palpable ambient madness to the area. At one point, the explorers meet a local guide named Servi. She spends half her time warning them about the crypts, and the other half screaming at her grandson Apis to get down from the ruins.
But the sources note that Apis isn't there.
Right. He's invisible, or perhaps he never existed at all. The corruption doesn't just warp the flesh, it fractures the mind of anyone who lingers too long.
So to navigate that ecosystem and finally breach Utzaal, our modern explorers have to reverse the spite of the Vaal nobles. They have to drain the waters. And this requires engaging directly with Doryani's contingency mechanisms.
The engineering is breathtaking, but the power source is horrifying.
Totally.
The canals are operated by a massive lock-and-key mechanism, but it requires a soul core to function.
Let's explain what a soul core actually is, because it is a dense crystal lattice. But to generate the immense thaumaturgical voltage required to move millions of gallons of water, it needs a battery. And that battery is the conscious agony of a human soul trapped inside the crystal.
The physics of a soul core rely on the resonance of suffering. The soul isn't consumed instantly. It is stretched, its pain converted into kinetic energy.
We see the reality of this through the story of Jaquani, a contemporary of Doryani and a member of the Inner Circle preparing for the Cataclysm. Jaquani was in possession of a massive soul core that was currently occupied by a criminal named Blackjaw.
It was basically a solitary confinement cell inside a glowing rock.
Yeah. And when the sky turned red when Jaquani knew Atziri's communion had triggered the end, he followed Doryani's protocol with absolute precision. He removed the criminal from the core and voluntarily inserted his own soul into the crystal.
He willfully subjected himself to what he described in his own logs as a punishment worse than death.
He did this so his conscious mind could power a massive mechanical warden, a machine called Atzoatl, to guard the drainage mechanism until the exact right moment thousands of years later. It requires a staggering detachment from empathy to subject yourself to that.
It does. But it also highlights a severe logical flaw in Doryani's grand design, one that the treasure hunter Alva actually points out during the expedition.
Right. Alva looks at these soul cores and realizes they are ultimately just batteries. They deplete. The soul eventually burns out. If you are designing a contingency plan meant to span millennia, how is human sacrifice an efficient long-term power source?
It's terribly inefficient.
It is the equivalent of building a multi-billion-dollar supercomputer to calculate the survival of the human race, but you are powering it by forcing a hamster to run on a wheel. Eventually, the hamster dies, the power cuts out, and the system fails. It is an unsustainable, dead-end technology.
That flaw is the blind spot of institutional arrogance. When a civilization views human life as a limitless, disposable resource, they lose the capacity to design sustainable systems.
Wow, that's a great point.
Doryani's brilliance was immense, but it was constrained by the horrific paradigm of his own culture. He couldn't imagine an energy source greater than human suffering because his society was built entirely on that currency.
Like they couldn't see past their own methods.
Exactly. It is the sunk cost fallacy on a civilization-ending scale. They industrialized suffering, and when the system demanded more power, they just increased the suffering rather than innovating a new method.
That is a phenomenal way to frame it. So the modern explorers defeat Atzoatl, extract Jaquani's soul core, plug it into the canal mechanism, and pull the lever. The waters violently drain away, and the drowned city of Utzaal is exposed to the air for the first time in 2,000 years.
Which is a monumental discovery.
And what do they find inside?
They find two massive structures that serve as a horrific sociological study in extreme isolation. They represent the dual fates of the Vaal survivors who are locked inside the city when the nobles raise the waters.
Let's start with the first structure, the apex of filth.
Just a lovely name.
Right. After the Cataclysm, a large group of Vaal citizens found themselves trapped inside this man-made mountain. They were completely cut off by the floodwaters. Starvation set in. In the dark, surrounded by the rotting magic of their dead empire, they found specialized mushrooms growing out of the corruption.
And they consumed these fungi which had severe psychedelic properties.
Yeah, the mushrooms showed them glorious visions of a thriving, vibrant world. The trapped Vaal wrote that they believed they were on the cusp of transcendence.
But the reality of their situation was biological devolution. We have seen real-world isolation experiments where the human mind begins to hallucinate within days to compensate for a lack of stimuli. Imagine that process extended over 2,000 years, aided by highly radioactive corrupted hallucinogens and rampant inbreeding.
They evolved backwards. They morphed into grotesque fungal-infected monsters. And the tragedy is they still retain a twisted version of their culture.
Yeah, they do.
In the before times, they worshipped Queen Atziri. Now they worship their literal mother, an incestuous, bloated giant known as the Queen of Filth. She is the source of the mushrooms. There is even a mutated crone down there called the Cauldron Keeper who peacefully boils the mushrooms into flasks, for you utterly unaware of what she has become.
The apex of filth represents the biological degradation of the Vaal. They adapted to survive the toxic environment, but the cost of that survival was their humanity. They became an extension of the rot.
But the second structure, the Temple of Kopek, showcases something entirely different. The explorers enter this massive ziggurat, expecting more monsters. Instead, they find people who look relatively normal.
At first glance, anyway.
Yeah, at first glance.
Yeah.
But these people are kneeling on the ground, staring up at a massive, blinding, artificial sun suspended in the ceiling.
Yeah.
And they are worshiping it.
If the apex of filth is biological devolution, the Temple of Kopek is psychological devolution.
Exactly. Because that artificial sun is not a god. It is a machine. The temple is maintained by a being named Kitsuli. Originally, Cataclysm was a mortal Vaal. His official title under Doryani was the Architect of Time.
Quite the title.
He was a brilliant engineer, tasked with building a highly specific mechanism inside this temple and waiting for a predetermined signal to activate it. But the signal didn't come for 2,000 years.
You cannot lock a human mind in a stasis of waiting for 2 millennia and expect its cognitive functions to remain intact. Without new information, without societal context, memory begins to erode. The original purpose degrades into ritual.
He completely loses his grip on reality. He forgets his own purpose. He actually alters his own title, shifting from the Architect of Time to the High Priest of the Sun. He begins to worship the very artificial environment he was employed to maintain.
It is a profound showcase of the degradation of knowledge. When highly advanced science is isolated for thousands of years without the cultural context that produced it, it inevitably morphs into fanatic religion.
The complex machine becomes an inexplicable miracle.
Precisely. The architect who built the machine becomes a priest who serves it.
It is devastating to witness. So Alva and the player fight their way past Cataclysm to the top of this temple, searching for the fabled device to save the Vaal that Doryani was rumored to have built. They find a platform suspended above the artificial sun. Alva realizes the machinery requires Vaal blood to operate as a biometric key. She cuts her hand, lets the blood drip onto the stone, and the massive platform groans to life.
The mechanics of blood magic here are fascinating, especially regarding Alva's role in the story. For listeners familiar with the first Path of Exile game, Alva is a well-known treasure hunter from Oriath, heavily involved with a group called the Reliquarians. She is famous for her ability to activate Vaal technology.
But the sources make a critical distinction regarding the timeline. This deep dive into Utzaal features the youngest version of Alva we have ever seen.
Yes.
This event predates her confident time-hopping appearances in Path of Exile 1 by a full 2 decades.
That context is vital. When she cuts her hand to activate the platform in the Temple of Kopek, her reaction is one of genuine shock. This is the exact defining moment in her life where she discovers that her specific bloodline can interface with ancient thaumaturgy.
And what the blood activates is staggering. The platform reveals that Doryani's device to save the Vaal isn't a bomb to destroy the beast, nor is it a shield to protect the city. It is a blood-powered time gateway.
A stable portal.
Yeah, a stable portal that bridges the year 1619 IC directly back to the year 400 BIC, right to the eve of the Vaal Cataclysm.
When this is revealed, Oswald, the pragmatic logistics-focused Oriathan leading the expedition, asks a question that cuts right through the awe.
Right. Oswald looks at the portal and says, essentially, if you know an apocalypse is coming that will wipe out your entire civilization, why on earth would you build a time machine that goes back to the moment of the apocalypse?
It's a fair question.
Why wouldn't you build a machine that lets your people escape forward into the future? It is a massive logical inconsistency. Why build a door leading back into a burning building?
It only makes sense if the purpose of the gateway was never evacuation.
Wait, let me parse that. If he didn't build it to get his people out, he built it to bring something in.
Precisely. And this is where we have to untangle Doryani's prophecy. Sometime before Atziri's communion, Doryani receives a vision of the future. He is shown that the communion will trigger a cataclysm. But the prophecy also dictates that the exact moment of the end will be heralded by the arrival of 2 specific figures, a woman carrying Vaal blood and a terrifying entity known as the Demon of Atzoatl.
Those 2 figures are Alva and the player character.
Yes.
But here is the meta-narrative twist that makes this so brilliant. When Doryani calls the player the Demon of Atzoatl, he is judging them based on the events of the first Path of Exile game.
Which is just wild to think about.
In that game, an older Alva and the player use blood magic to repeatedly travel back in time to the ancient Temple of Atzoatl, massacring the architects inside to change the temple's modern-day layout for better loot.
It is a phenomenal detail. In the current timeline of Path of Exile 2, the year 1619 IC, the player hasn't committed those massacres yet. Alva hasn't even fully mastered time travel yet.
Doryani is breaking the 4th wall. He is terrified of the player because of atrocities they will commit in a timeline that hasn't chronologically happened yet for these specific characters.
Right.
And this introduces a massive predestination paradox. Did Doryani only instruct Cataclysm to build the time gateway because the prophecy explicitly told him time travelers from the future were going to use it?
It is the ultimate closed-loop paradox. The door only exists because he knows you will walk through it, but you can only walk through it because he built the door.
That breaks my brain a little bit.
It reveals the horrific desperation of Doryani's master plan, though. He knew he didn't have the firepower in 400 BIC to stop Atziri or the Beast, so he spent decades building a cross-temporal distress beacon, hoping to pull these supposedly terrifying god-killing entities, Alva and the player, from 2,000 years in the future to act as his personal assassins.
It is a literal Hail Mary pass thrown across 2 millennia. So Alva and the player step through the gateway. The transition is violent. Suddenly, they are standing in Utzaal in 400 BIC.
Right in the thick of it.
The city is at its absolute peak. It isn't a drowned ruin. It is vibrant, heavily populated, and pulsing with thaumaturgical energy. But the second they arrive, the Vaal military initiates a lethal ambush.
A Vaal warrior named Viper Nepawatsi orchestrates the attack. On the surface, attacking random travelers seems excessive, but it perfectly aligns with the cultural awareness of the prophecy.
That actually makes total sense. If Doryani, the chief thaumaturge, knows that the arrival of time travelers signals the literal end of the world, then his elite military forces are absolutely briefed on the threat.
They know what to look for.
They don't need to understand the physics of the time gateway. All they know is the standing order. If you ever see a woman bleeding on a platform and a heavily armed stranger step out of thin air, kill them immediately or the sky will fall. They're desperately trying to shoot the messenger to stop the message.
But the player survives the ambush and descends into the heart of Doryani's operation, a subterranean complex known as the Black Chambers.
The Black Chambers. I need to spend time describing the visuals here, because it is the ultimate realization of what the Vaal truly were. The environment is a sickening, macabre juxtaposition of hyper-advanced technology and abattoir gore.
It is the industrialized nightmare made manifest.
You walk into these chambers and you see technology that is thousands of years more advanced than anything currently existing in Wraeclast in 1619 IC. There is fluorescent humming electric lighting. There are electronic motion sensor-operated bridges that self-assemble as you walk toward them.
It sounds like sci-fi.
Right. But then you look at what this miraculous technology is actually doing. You see human bodies being methodically sliced into cross-sections by automated lasers.
Horrific.
You see a circular pillar spinning like a dry cleaner's coat rack. But instead of clothes, it is hanging dozens of screaming, vivisected humans. You see bodies strung up with their intestines pulled out, used as decorative wiring. It is a mechanized factory farm for human suffering.
Which brings us back to the physics of the soul course. Doryani's contingency plans required immense sustained thaumaturgical voltage. He wasn't just powering a canal, he was trying to punch a hole through time itself. To generate that kind of power, he required an industrial scale of slaughter. The Black Chambers are the battery compartment for his time machine.
When the player finally corners Doryani in the depths of the chambers, the man is frantic. He yells, "Fool, there is no time. Atziri will soon commune with the beast."
He knows he is out of time.
The communion is starting. He straps himself into a massive, heavily armed mechanical suit called Doryani's Triumph, and he attacks. He fights with the ferocity of a man who has spent his entire life calculating the math to save the world, only to realize the equation is failing.
He cannot accept that fate is immutable. He refuses to believe his intellect cannot overpower destiny.
But the player defeats him, smashing the mechanical suit. And this is where the irony of his character truly solidifies. As he lies defeated in 400 BIC, Alva urgently convinces him that he has lost. He cannot stop the Vaal Cataclysm. It is already happening.
The sky is already falling.
But she offers him an alternative. She tells him he can step through the portal and come with them to the future, to 1619 IC, to help them contain a new threat, a new beast that is gestating.
And he accepts. He abandons his dying civilization and steps through the portal. This brilliantly resolves a massive lingering mystery from the first game, where Hinakora, the Karui goddess of death, repeatedly prophesied that Doryani is missing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she couldn't locate his soul in the afterlife or in the historical record because he literally skipped over 2,000 years of history.
But we have to look closely at what Doryani says when he arrives in 1619 IC. He looks around. He acknowledges that Atziri's communion caused the utter destruction of his civilization. He sees his beloved technologically supreme city of Utzaal reduced to a toxic, drowned swamp.
The apex of filth.
Right. He knows his people devolved into mushroom-eating monsters or went insane worshipping light bulbs. Yet he still refers to the beast as a work of genius. He still fundamentally believes that corruption is a gift, a tool capable of elevating humanity.
It is staggering. The physical evidence of his failure is literally rotting the air he breathes, and his conclusion is, well, the underlying science was still sound.
He learns absolutely nothing. He represents the ultimate manifestation of the sunk cost fallacy. He has sacrificed too much of his own humanity, slaughtered too many thousands in his black chambers to ever admit that the foundational premise of his life's work was flawed.
Admitting that would break him.
If he admits that corruption cannot be controlled, he has to admit he is just a butcher.
He is a visionary, utterly unable to detach from his obsession. But his arrival in the future prompts the most vital question of this entire deep dive. We established that the Time Gateway was merely a distress beacon to summon the player. It wasn't the actual weapon Doryani intended to use to stop the beast. So what was the weapon?
This is the final, earth-shattering revelation buried in the sources. Doryani reveals that his master plan wasn't to invent a new weapon. He was trying to assemble an ancient artifact, a weapon created by a civilization he refers to as the Precursors.
The Precursors. That term has never appeared in the entire recorded history of Wraeclast lore until this moment.
Never. And when you start tracing the timeline backwards, the implications are cosmic. Doryani only managed to secure one piece of this precursor weapon. He was desperately trying to acquire the remaining 3 pieces from the Karui archipelago of Nagama Kanui, but he simply ran out of time before Atziri triggered the Cataclysm.
Let's lay out the timeline to understand who these precursors must be. The sources detail the primeval Vaal. These are the ancient ancestors of Doryani's people existing thousands of years before 400 BIC. We know of their tyrant king An. We know his civilization was buried when terrifying creatures called the Lightless Beings, constructed of bone and pure darkness, crawled out of the earth.
Right, and the lore tells us the Lightless were eventually fought off by 2 twin human sisters, Solaria and Lundara, who would eventually ascend to become Solaris and Lunaris, 2 of the most powerful gods in the pantheon.
Exactly.
So the primeval Vaal existed long before the gods walked the earth, and these precursors existed long before the primeval Vaal.
Which means, definitively, the precursors existed before the entity known as Sin.
Yes, and Sin is the being who engineered and created the beast.
If we connect those dots, we arrive at a terrifying conclusion. If the precursors engineered a modular weapon specifically designed to combat and neutralize corruption, and they built it before Sin ever created the beast, what does that mean?
It means corruption predates the beast.
Yep.
It means the entire foundational understanding of Wraeclast's history is wrong. Every scholar, every player who spent the last decade believing the beast was the source of all nightmare, they were looking at the wrong patient. The beast isn't the disease. It's just a symptom.
A localized fleshy vessel.
Exactly, for a much older, darker cosmic force that has been active since before recorded time.
The historical texts briefly mention a mythological era called the Winter of the World, a 1,000-year period of ice and suffering. Could that have been an ancient eruption of this primordial corruption? Was that the cataclysm that finally wiped out the precursors despite their advanced weaponry?
It flips the entire board upside down. We spent this whole journey unraveling Doryani's desperate, horrific attempts to fight the beast, only to realize he was trying to cure a cough while ignoring the cosmic cancer that has been rotting the universe since the dawn of time.
It forces us to completely reevaluate the nature of magic, the pantheon of gods, and the inevitable cycle of civilizational collapse.
So let's zoom out and look at this massive journey. We started with a broken X-ray, believing Doryani was the arrogant villain who single-handedly broke the world in 400 BIC.
And we learned that Queen Atziri's vanity was the true catalyst.
We discovered that Doryani was actually a tragic, monstrous visionary, constructing an intricate contingency plan involving drowned cities, souls trapped in crystals, and a literal time machine just to buy a fraction of a chance at survival.
And we ended with the horrifying realization that the enemy they were all fighting isn't even the true source of the nightmare.
And what is the overarching takeaway here for you, the listener? Why should you invest this deeply into the minutiae of a fictional civilization's collapse?
Because it provides a masterclass in recognizing systemic arrogance. The Vaal didn't fall because of one bad spell. They fell because their entire society was built on the unsustainable fuel of human exploitation.
Right, when their systems began to fail, they didn't pivot, they doubled down.
Doryani's lifeboat failed not because he wasn't smart enough, but because he built it using the same corrupted physics that caused the iceberg in the first place.
It's a profound reminder that history is rarely a simple narrative of a singular villain making a bad choice. History is a chaotic intersection of desperate people trapped in failing systems, making horrific choices to survive disasters they orchestrated.
Our understanding of the past is only ever as reliable as the evidence that survives the flood. And sometimes that evidence has been warped by millennia of spite and madness.
But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final lingering thought. A paradox that builds right off the mechanics we've been discussing. We established early on that thaumaturgy is the physical manipulation of reality using corruption.
It is the language of the nightmare.
And we spent a long time analyzing how Doryani built a time gateway powered by Vaal blood to pull you and Alva out of 1619 IC.
Yes, the cross-temporal distress beacon.
Think about the physics of that.
Yeah.
If thaumaturgy is purely corruption, isn't time travel itself just the ultimate, most severe form of corruption?
Oh, man.
By using blood magic to literally rip a hole in the space-time continuum, bridging the present day with the year 400 BIC, aren't Doryani Alva and the player inadvertently infecting the very fabric of time with the nightmare they are trying to escape?
That is a terrifying realization. They aren't just traversing the timeline, they are irradiating it.
Yeah.
By opening that door, they have ensured that the corruption doesn't just spread across the geographic map of Wraeclast, but it bleeds backwards and forwards across history itself. The cure is accelerating the disease.
It really makes you wonder. Maybe next time the doctor points at the x-ray and tells you the bone is broken, you shouldn't just ask how to put a cast on it. You should ask if the radiation from the x-ray machine itself is what weakened the bone in the first place. Keep questioning the narrative, stay curious, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.